What if the real value of a soybean does not end when a farmer harvests it? Across Burkina Faso, that question is becoming increasingly important. A soybean can leave a farmer's field as a simple agricultural crop, but once it enters an industrial chain, the story changes. That same soybean can become cooking oil for a family, protein-rich material for animal feed, income for a farmer, work for a factory employee, business for a distributor, and eventually another building block in the country's food economy. This is where SIATOL enters the story. At its industrial complex in Ouagadougou, locally sourced soybeans are processed into products for both human consumption and livestock production. Instead of looking at agriculture and industry as two separate worlds, the model connects the field to the factory and the factory to the market. And that raises a much larger question. How much more economic value could Burkina Faso keep at home if more of what its farmers grow were processed inside the country before reaching consumers? This question has become especially significant during the leadership of Ibrahim Traore. His government has placed food sovereignty, domestic production, and local processing near the center of its economic message. But SIATOL itself predates his government, so the real story is more complicated than giving one leader credit for one factory. In this video, we will follow the soybean itself. We will examine the farmer supplying it, the factory transforming it, the jobs connected to it, and the livestock sector benefiting from what remains after the oil is extracted. We will also examine what can go wrong, why imported inputs still matter, what international financial institutions are actually saying about Burkina Faso's economic direction, and what other African countries might learn from this experiment. If you value stories that examine what Africa is actually building on the ground rather than stopping at political slogans, follow the channel. Because sometimes the clearest way to understand an economic transformation is to begin with something small enough to hold in your hand. One soybean. Now follow that soybean back to where the industrial story actually begins. Not inside a factory, but in the hands of a farmer. SIATOL was established in 2010, years before Ibrahim Traore came to power. That distinction matters because the company's agricultural network was built over time. Recent reporting indicates that SIATOL has agricultural contracts with more than 3,000 small producers, while the company describes a broader network involving more than 5,000 producers. Those figures refer to different measures, so they should not be treated as the same number. What matters is the relationship behind them. For a small farmer, growing more soybeans only makes economic sense when there is someone prepared to buy the harvest. A processing company can help create that market. The farmer produces the crop, soybeans are collected and transported. They eventually reach SIATOL's industrial operations in Ouagadougou, where an agricultural commodity begins becoming an industrial input. That connection can create a powerful cycle. A reliable factory needs farmers. Farmers need reliable buyers, and both depend on transportation, prices, quality, financing, and predictable demand. But this is also where the first major weakness appears. SIATOL's own leadership has acknowledged that securing enough soybeans remains a continuing challenge. Every year, the company must work to obtain the quantity and quality of raw material its operations require. That is an important warning against believing that industrialization begins and ends with constructing a modern factory. Imagine a processing line capable of handling thousands of tons of soybeans each year. The machines may be ready, the workers may be waiting, the customers may want the finished products. But if the harvest arriving at the factory gate is too small, too expensive, or inconsistent in quality, part of that industrial capacity can sit unused. So Burkina Faso's soybean story is also an agricultural story. Factories cannot permanently outrun the fields supplying them. The first test of this value chain is therefore not how impressive the machinery looks. It is whether thousands of farmers can produce enough soybeans, earn a worthwhile return, and keep the raw material flowing from the countryside to the factory year after year. Now the soybean enters the factory, and this is where one crop begins to create two different streams of value. The first stream leads directly to the kitchen. Soybeans are processed so their oil can be extracted, refined, packaged, and sold as cooking oil. SIATOL markets soybean oil for household consumption in Burkina Faso. At this point, something important has happened. The farmer is no longer selling only an agricultural commodity. A local industrial system has taken that commodity and turned it into a finished consumer product with its own brand, packaging, distribution, and market. But the more interesting part of the story may be what happens after the oil is removed. The remaining soybean material is not simply thrown away. It contains valuable protein and can be used as soybean meal, an important ingredient in animal nutrition. SIATOL can combine this material with other ingredients to produce feed for poultry, pigs, cattle, and other livestock. So one soybean begins serving two markets. One part can eventually reach a family's cooking pot. Another part can help feed the chickens, pigs, or cattle raised by farmers elsewhere in the country. That second path matters because it connects crop farming to livestock production. A soybean farmer may never raise chickens, and a poultry farmer may never grow soybeans. Yet, industrial processing can place them inside the same economic chain. This is the deeper meaning of value addition. The greatest economic potential of a crop is not always found in the crop itself. It can emerge from what people learn to make from it. A soybean sold only as a raw agricultural product represents one transaction. A soybean transformed into refined oil and animal feed can support processing, packaging, transportation, retail activity, livestock production, and additional employment. And that explains why the SIATOL story is larger than cooking oil. Burkina Faso is testing whether more value can be created between the moment a farmer harvests a soybean and the moment the final products reach households and livestock producers. The next question is whether the industrial machinery behind that ambition is large enough to make a meaningful difference. Now we can see the machinery behind that ambition. SIATOL's industrial complex in Ouagadougou represents an investment of roughly $3.6 million. Its production lines are designed to connect soybean processing with animal feed manufacturing on a scale large enough to serve more than a neighborhood market. The animal feed operation can produce about 110 US tons per day, or roughly 33,000 US tons in a year. The soybean crushing line can handle about 44 US tons per day, with annual capacity of approximately 13,200 US tons. The refining operation can produce roughly 11 US tons of refined oil per day, or around 3,300 US tons annually. Those figures tell us what the machines can do, but another number tells us something about actual demand. SIATOL reported operating at around 70% of its overall production capacity. That matters because industrial capacity has little economic value when expensive equipment remains idle. The human footprint extends beyond the machinery. SIATOL employs about 145 permanent workers in addition to seasonal and occasional labor. Its distribution network has included more than 60 sales points and has been reported to directly support more than 100 additional jobs. And distribution is becoming increasingly important. In August 2026, SIATOL announced a partnership with Vivo Energy Burkina to make its soybean oil available through stores in the Shell service station network. That agreement illustrates a basic industrial lesson. Producing a bottle of oil is only half the journey. Someone must transport it, display it, sell it, and make it convenient for families to buy. So the factory gate is not the end of this value chain. Behind every ton of soybeans processed are farmers supplying crops, workers operating machinery, drivers moving goods, retailers reaching customers, and livestock producers purchasing feed. The real industrial question is therefore not simply how much a factory can produce. It is how much economic activity can be built around everything that passes through it. But how much of this value actually remains inside Burkina Faso? That is the harder question, because local production and complete economic independence are not the same thing. Consider the soybeans journey. A Burkinabe farmer grows the crop, a local company purchases it, workers in Ouagadougou process it, oil is refined and packaged for consumers. Soybean meal becomes an ingredient for animal feed. Distributors then move these products toward households and livestock producers. Every additional step performed inside Burkina Faso creates another opportunity for income, employment, skills, and business activity to remain connected to the domestic economy. This is why processing matters. If the economic journey ends when a farmer sells an unprocessed crop, the country captures the agricultural transaction. When that crop is transformed, packaged, distributed, and used as an input for another domestic industry, the chain becomes longer. But we should not confuse a longer domestic chain with complete sovereignty. A factory may process local soybeans while still depending on imported machinery. Replacement parts may come from abroad. Some packaging materials, industrial inputs, fuel, technology, or financing may also have foreign origins. The information available on SIATOL does not establish that every one of these elements is controlled inside Burkina Faso. That distinction is important. Economic sovereignty is not a switch that a country turns on one morning. It is better understood as a gradual reduction of critical dependencies. Burkina Faso does not need to manufacture every bolt in a processing machine before local soybean transformation becomes valuable. But if the country wants greater economic control over time, it must understand which parts of the chain remain vulnerable to decisions and supplies from outside its borders. The goal, therefore, is not isolation. The goal is greater productive capacity. Can more farmers sell to domestic processors? Can more products be manufactured locally? Can more distribution networks connect those products with consumers? Can local businesses reinvest and expand? SIATOL offers one practical example of that process. And once we look at the story this way, the next question becomes unavoidable. Why has domestic processing become such an important political issue under Ibrahim Traore? This is where Ibrahim Traore enters the story, not as the founder of SIATOL, but as the leader of a government placing domestic production and processing at the center of its economic agenda. SIATOL was established in 2010, more than a decade before Traore came to power. Giving him credit for creating the company would therefore distort its history. His influence lies elsewhere. Under Traore, Burkina Faso has made food sovereignty a national priority. The government has promoted greater agricultural production, better access to water and inputs, and stronger links between what farmers produce and what domestic industries can process. Traore has also publicly encouraged Burkinabe businesses to transform raw materials inside the country. When discussing oilseed production, he has specifically mentioned crops including soybeans and encouraged farmers to increase production as domestic processing opportunities expand. The economic logic is easy to understand. Burkina Faso can grow all seed crops, yet official figures have indicated that the country has imported more than 34,000 US tons of cooking oil in an average year. That creates an uncomfortable question. Why should a country capable of producing the agricultural raw material continue purchasing so much of the finished product from abroad? Building processing capacity is one possible answer. The objective is not simply to grow more soybeans. Farmers need buyers. Processors need raw materials. Factories need customers. And consumers need locally made products that can compete in price, quality, and availability. This is where SIATOL fits into the political environment of the Traore era. The company was not created by his government, but the model it represents aligns closely with the direction his administration has promoted. Produce more at home, process more at home, encourage private businesses to invest, and gradually reduce dependence where domestic capacity can realistically replace it. Still, political vision alone cannot guarantee success. A president cannot manufacture a soybean harvest by decree. Government policy cannot replace efficient management, reliable machinery, competitive prices, or productive farmers. Traore can help set the direction. Whether Burkina Faso can turn that direction into lasting industrial strength will depend on what happens far beyond the presidential office. SIATOL is not standing alone. Across Burkina Faso, other projects suggest that agricultural processing is becoming part of a broader industrial strategy. One useful comparison is AgroServe industry in Bobo Dioulasso, inaugurated by Ibrahim Traore in December 2025. The facility represents an investment of roughly $20 million. Its corn processing capacity is about 176 US tons per day. Instead of selling corn only as a harvested crop, the company can transform it into flour, semolina, grits, bran, and other products. Its activities also include soybean protein. The comparison with SIATOL is revealing. With SIATOL, soybeans can become cooking oil and animal feed. With AgroServe, corn can become several processed food products. Different crops, different companies, but the underlying economic idea is similar. Take something grown in Burkina Faso and perform more of the valuable work after harvest inside Burkina Faso. The government has supported this direction through a broader agricultural campaign aimed at increasing domestic production, improving food security, and connecting agriculture more closely with markets and processing. Water infrastructure is part of that equation, so are better agricultural inputs, improved production, transportation, private investment, and reliable markets. The state has also intervened directly in strategic areas. In 2024, the government nationalized SOFAB, an animal feed company, as part of its food sovereignty policy. But this does not mean every factory is becoming state-owned. Traore has repeatedly encouraged private investors and Burkinabe entrepreneurs to participate in industrial development. That makes SIATOL particularly important as an example of a private company operating within a political environment increasingly focused on local transformation. So the emerging picture is not simply government versus private enterprise. It is an attempt to connect farms, private capital, public infrastructure, industrial capacity, and national food needs. That ambition is much larger than one soybean factory. But the larger the ambition becomes, the more important another question becomes. What could cause this entire strategy to fail? Now we reach the hardest part of the story. Building factories is impressive. Keeping them productive for 10 or 20 years is much harder. The first danger is raw material supply. SIATOL needs a steady flow of soybeans. If farmers cannot produce enough, or if prices and quality become unpredictable, expensive processing equipment can sit below capacity. The second challenge begins on the farm itself. Farmers need reliable seeds, water, fertilizer, and other inputs. They need transportation to move their harvest. And most importantly, they need prices that make increasing production worthwhile. Industrial growth cannot permanently move faster than agricultural productivity. Third comes competition. A locally produced bottle of cooking oil cannot survive on patriotism alone. Families still care about price and quality. Livestock producers purchasing animal feed must also consider whether the product helps them operate profitably. Domestic industries ultimately need to become competitive. Fourth is distribution. A factory can produce thousands of tons of goods, but those products create little value while sitting in a warehouse. They must reach towns, villages, retailers, livestock farms, and households at a price customers can afford. And fifth is management. Burkina Faso already has a warning from its own animal feed industry. Before the government nationalized SOFAB in 2024, official information indicated that the company had been operating at only around 20% of its production capacity while facing serious financial problems. That example carries an important lesson. Owning a factory is not the same as possessing industrial strength. Machines require maintenance. Companies need working capital. Managers must control costs. Farmers need dependable markets. Consumers need competitive products, and every part of the chain must function together. This is why SIATOL should be viewed as an important experiment, not proof that Burkina Faso has already achieved economic sovereignty. The real measure of success will come years from now. Can the factory remain productive? Can farmers expand with it? Can the products compete without permanent protection? Can profits finance future growth? A ribbon can be cut in one afternoon. A durable industry must prove itself season after season. Now comes the question that often produces more heat than light. Has the West opposed Burkina Faso because it wants to process more of its own agricultural products? There is no reliable evidence that the United States, France, or the European Union has specifically attacked SIATOL for producing soybean oil and animal feed. The real international debate is more complicated. Institutions such as the International Monetary Fund have raised concerns about policies that restrict imports, expand state involvement, or potentially reduce the space available for private investment. The economic argument is straightforward. If local companies are protected from competition for too long, they may lose the pressure to become more efficient, lower prices, and improve quality. That criticism deserves to be taken seriously. But there is another side. A country that continually exports raw materials while importing finished products can remain dependent on industries located elsewhere. Burkina Faso is therefore asking whether temporary protection and targeted government support can help domestic producers become strong enough to compete. And Western-linked institutions are not uniformly opposed to that objective. In 2026, the World Bank approved more than $215 million for agricultural transformation in Burkina Faso, including support for value chains, processing capacity, and market access. So the real disagreement is not simply Burkina Faso against the West. It is about method. How much should the state intervene? How long should an emerging industry receive protection? And when should a protected company be expected to stand on its own? Those questions matter because protection can help an infant industry grow, but permanent protection can also shelter inefficiency. Burkina Faso's challenge is therefore not to choose between sovereignty and international cooperation. It is to build industry strong enough that sovereignty eventually rests on productive capacity rather than political protection. One soybean may seem insignificant, but follow it from a farmer's field to a processing plant, a bottle of cooking oil, a bag of animal feed, and finally a household or livestock farm, and a much larger picture emerges. The lesson for Africa is not that every country should copy SIATOL. The lesson is to examine each national value chain and ask where economic value is being created and where it is being lost. Farmers need reliable buyers. Factories need reliable raw materials. Industries must find productive uses for byproducts. Distribution networks must connect factories to customers. And local products must eventually compete on quality, price, and availability without depending forever on government protection. That is how sovereignty becomes measurable. Not through speeches, but through productive farms, functioning factories, skilled workers, competitive businesses, and markets capable of connecting them. For Burkina Faso, the experiment remains unfinished. Ibrahim Traore has made food sovereignty and domestic processing prominent parts of the national agenda, but the long-term results will depend on performance. SIATOL and other projects must prove that local transformation can remain commercially sustainable year after year. The same question extends beyond Burkina Faso. Across Mali and Niger, leaders such as Assimi Goïta and Abdourahmane Tiani are also debating sovereignty and the future of the Sahel. Across West Africa, the African Union and national governments face a broader challenge. How can African economies capture more value from what they already produce while still trading and cooperating with partners, including France and other international markets? That may become one of the defining African news stories of the coming years. Africa possesses enormous agricultural and natural resources, but possessing resources is not the same as controlling the value created from them. So return once more to that soybean. The important question is not simply who grows it. Ask who processes it, who transports it, who turns its byproducts into another industry, who sells the finished goods, who develops the skills, and who reinvests the profits. Then ask the same question about cocoa, cotton, coffee, minerals, timber, and every other resource leaving African soil. If there is one resource in your country that should be processed further at home, share it in the comments. And follow this channel as we continue examining how African nations are trying to turn their own resources into lasting productive power. Because the future may begin with something as small as a single soybean. We sincerely appreciate your time and support. Every video on this channel is carefully researched, thoughtfully written, and meticulously edited by our dedicated team. We don't rely on automated production or shortcuts to create our content. Every story, every visual, and every detail is crafted with genuine care, passion, and a commitment to bringing you meaningful, high-quality videos